When did humans begin to believe in the invisible? The answer is not found in ancient books, but in the earth, specifically in prehistoric graves. Not all creatures care about death. Most animals leave the bodies of their dead untouched. But humans are different. Homo sapiens, and even Neanderthals, left clear signs of intentional treatment of the dead. One of the most significant archaeological discoveries comes from Shanidar Cave in the Zagros Mountains of present-day Iraq. Neanderthals lived there between roughly 50,000 and 65,000 years ago. Researchers uncovered a burial with an unusual concentration of pollen from various plant species in the surrounding soil. This pollen was not naturally accumulated. No strong winds or flowing water could have carried it to such a localized spot around the body. After ruling out environmental factors, researchers concluded the flowers were brought and deliberately placed in the grave. Some of these flowers are known to have anti-inflammatory properties, healing benefits, or strong scents, suggesting that the act may have had symbolic or comforting purposes, not merely aesthetic. This burial was accompanied by other structured elements. The body was laid in a specific direction, often on its side. Some were found in a fetal position, possibly symbolizing a return to the cycle of life or rebirth. Personal items were included, such as stone tools, animal bones, or decorative shell and ivory ornaments. Clearly, the dead were not simply discarded or hidden. They were treated according to meaningful patterns. This is not a biological reflex. It is an organized, symbolic behavior, evidence of abstract thought and symbolic reasoning. From an evolutionary perspective, this marks a critical point. Symbolic thinking is foundational to the development of religion, belief systems, and the concept of the soul. It requires the brain to operate with associative thinking, abstraction, and imagination of the non-visible. The flowers, the artifacts, the burial positioning, all suggest that Neanderthals could assign meaning to death and maintain a relationship with the dead through ritualized behavior. They did not write history. They left no myths in text. But the way they buried their dead is humanity's first written statement of belief. The hypothesis of belief in an afterlife, spirits, or collective memory has since become central to anthropology and archaeology. If an extinct species like the Neanderthal believed in something beyond the physical world, then the origin of belief cannot be credited solely to Homo sapiens. It may have begun earlier, from a common ancestor or through parallel evolutionary experiences, as the brain grew complex enough to contemplate the end of life. In the broader evolutionary picture, sites like Shanidar help us understand not just Neanderthals, but ourselves. They force us to ask, is belief a product of civilization or a biological instinct rooted in the era of hunters and gatherers? Art 2. The dead did not disappear. Burial is not a biological reflex. It is a marker of symbolic thinking and the foundation for spiritual belief. Archaeological sites across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, from Neanderthals to Homo sapiens, show striking similarities in how prehistoric humans treated death. Carefully positioned bodies, oriented in specific directions, accompanied by personal items. This reflects a consistent mental framework. The dead still played a role in the community, even after death. In Paleolithic burial pits, bodies were often placed on their side, knees bent, like a fetus. Many faced the setting sun, perhaps suggesting a life cycle or ending. These are not natural positions of decomposition. They are clearly deliberate. Grave goods include broken spears, used tools, bead necklaces made from shells, animal teeth, or carved stones. These items had no practical use for the deceased, but they carried symbolic meaning. They may have served as personal tokens, offerings, or spiritual amulets for a journey beyond death. The recurrence of such behavior across diverse locations indicates this was not random. It was a culturally driven ritual pattern, Some graves included animals, wolves, birds, or small predators. While humans had strong bonds with animals, placing them in graves could be symbolic, a guide, a companion, or a totem of power. In some sites, children were buried with adults, suggesting familial continuity or the role of family in funerary rites. Closer inspection reveals differences in burial forms, hinting at early social stratification. A neatly placed body, with grave goods and protection from the elements, likely belonged to someone of status, a respected elder, seasoned hunter, or honored member. Cruder burials or scattered remains might belong to accident victims, social outcasts, or those who died under unusual conditions. This behavior reflects an early social consciousness of death. Not all deaths were equal. Differentiated burials imply a classification of roles, values, and relationships, even beyond life. Remarkably, there is no writing, no temples, no written mythology. Yet the physical acts surrounding death convey rich spiritual meaning. These are the foundations of belief. Religion may require a system, but early belief only needed repetition, symbolism, and faith in what reason couldn't grasp. Anthropologists call burial the earliest form of spiritual expression, not because early humans understood the afterlife, but because they began assigning meaning to death, turning it into a community event, sanctifying memory, and extending the presence of the deceased through ritual. In short, burial was not just corpse management, it was a social statement. This person lived, mattered, and deserves to be remembered. They were buried not to disappear, but to continue existing in another form. Memory, symbol, and ceremony. This marked the moment when humans crossed the line from biology into culture. Part 3. Around the fire, thinking of the dead. In prehistoric groups, fire was more than heat and light. It was the organizing center of life. Archaeology shows that Stone Age humans did not live scattered, but clustered around hearths, where ash, charcoal, and bone fragments accumulated over years, sometimes generations. These hearths were often carefully maintained, stone-lined fire pits, pebble circles, deep layers of burned sediment. Alongside them, charred animal bones, cooking tools, and plant remains. This tells us they were not temporary flames, but fixed domestic areas, used cyclically. It was in these spaces that collective behaviors occurred. Around the fire, people cooked, shared food, told stories, passed down skills, and most importantly, remembered the dead. Though there are no written records, the spatial structures and repeated usage suggest fires had spiritual significance. They were places where personal memory became shared memory, where loss became storytelling, and where absence became ritual. In harsh survival conditions, death was common. Not everyone survived the winter, the hunt, or disease, yet the living gathered, and the stories of the dead were retold, passed from old to young. These reconstructions come not from imagination but observation. In long-term dwellings, researchers found partially burned items, human bones in ashes, or personal objects charred near hearths, suggesting acts of remembrance embedded in daily life. Instead of separating the dead, prehistoric people may have preserved their presence through storytelling. Objects were physical traces. No temples, but the hearth served as the bridge between life and memory. Acts like touching old tools, tracing carved stones, repeating songs, or showing children ancient ashes could have been the earliest non-verbal memorials. When repeated over time, they became patterns, eventually evolving into rituals. Crucially, these rituals did not require gods or doctrines. They relied on emotional memory, community bonds, and the need to maintain group identity. In this context, the dead were not gone. They became part of the collective narrative, retold and shared around the fire. Their presence endured, not physically, but symbolically. From the perspective of cultural evolution, this was a key transition. When humans could evoke the dead through story, object, and ritual, they gained abstract control over memory. This laid the groundwork for organized funerals, belief systems, and eventually, religion. In conclusion, ancient fires did more than cook meat. They cooked memory, bonded communities, and formed a bridge of communication between the living and the dead. No myths were needed, just fire, ash, and memory. That was the beginning of ritual. Part 4. Symbols, Art, and the Invisible World. Prehistoric humans had no writing systems, but they left a unique kind of information: symbols. These weren't sentences. They were images, colors, and marks, and the first way humans connected with the invisible world. Hundreds of caves across Europe, Asia, and Africa contain organized art, negative handprints, abstract shapes, spiral patterns, repeated dots, animals, and stylized human forms. All were made using natural mineral pigments: red ochre, charcoal black, limestone white, iron oxide yellow. Sites like Chilvet, France, El Castillo, Spain, or Maros, Indonesia, share a striking similarity. Cave art often appears near long-term habitations or burial sites. This implies a strong link between early art, communal memory, and sacred belief. Symbols were not just decorations. They weren't placed in obvious spots, but deep inside caves, on hard-to-reach surfaces, or near ritual traces. Anthropologists see this as early abstract thought, where humans gave meaning to images and used them to convey the unseen. One iconic example, the negative handprint, made by blowing pigment around a hand, leaving a blank silhouette. It may signify presence, identity, or a silent declaration. I was here. In a world without writing, it was a primitive signature. The use of red pigment in burials is another global pattern. Ochre, rich in iron oxide, was ground, mixed with fat or water, and applied to the dead. Skeletal remains from both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens bear red pigment traces on skulls, hands, chests, or full bodies. In early cognition, red symbolized blood, life, birth, or transition between life and death. Scientists suggest ochre wasn't for decoration, it was ritual. Burial in red may signify rebirth, soul protection, or a passage to another world. Even without theology, assigning color to life events was a form of belief. Importantly, symbols weren't confined to caves. Some were carved on stone, wood, bone, or tools. They may have marked clan identity, warnings, or sacred zones. Their reuse across sites implies inheritance, a key to forming belief systems. Cave paintings, burial colors, handprints, stone carvings don't form a religion, but they reveal a proto-belief system, humans assigning meaning to death, honoring the dead, and connecting with what they couldn't see. This was a turning point. With symbolic thinking, humans no longer reacted like animals. They redefined the world through memory, imagery, and belief. They began living not only in reality, but also in an invisible world made of symbols, dreams, and myths. This was the foundation of organized religion. Part 5. Belief as a surviving tool. Belief is often seen as cultural or emotional, but evolutionarily, it may have served a critical function: survival. In a prehistoric world of predators, disease, and harsh climates, survival depended not only on hunting or tools, but on group cohesion. Belief, in the form of ancestor remembrance, ritual repetition, and storytelling, helped maintain that cohesion. Functionally, belief in spirits or an afterlife didn't need to be true, it just needed to work. When a member died, fear and grief could disrupt the group. But if belief framed death as transformation into spirit, ancestor, or afterlife, then emotions could stabilize, loss accepted, and order preserved. This collective emotional stability was vital under unpredictable conditions. Caring for the elderly or injured in hunter-gatherer societies was costly. Yet they were often fed, healed, and retained, not just out of emotion, but because belief assigned sacred value to life. In this view, life and death were not separate states, but parts of one sacred continuum. Anthropology shows that in traditional societies, Funerals, memorials, and ancestor myths shape morality. Deviants were watched by ancestors or haunted by spirits, an early form of social control. Without law or institutions, belief acted as moral software, guiding individual behavior to fit group norms. Memorial acts, ritual burials, grave goods, symbols, stories around fire formed a collective expression system, solidifying identity and passing intergenerational knowledge. Groups with shared rituals, symbols, and beliefs cooperated better, endured longer, and fractured less in crisis. Compared to extinct humans like Neanderthals or Denisovans, who buried their dead but lacked clear ritual evidence, Homo sapiens mastered belief as a unifying tool. This may explain why Homo sapiens not only survived, but came to dominate the planet. Belief did not hinder evolution. It expanded social adaptability, cohesion, and laid the groundwork for law, politics, and institutional religion. This was a continuous evolutionary chain: simple burial, ritual, legend, belief, morality, civilization. From a small act, placing flowers in a grave 65,000 years ago, humanity opened a world of ideas, where death was not the end, but a bridge between now and memory, between the living and the beyond. If stone tools were proof of physical intelligence, belief was the first sign of symbolic intelligence. It helped Homo sapiens think beyond instinct, connect beyond the present, and organize society beyond the family. In other words, belief was not just a feeling, it was a survival tool.